Hi friends, welcome back. Welcome back to Sunday School. I hope you are having an amazing summer. Well, here at church, we're reading through the Bible. We are still at the very beginning of the Bible in the Old Testament. We have been reading lots of stories about creation, and today we're going to read another story. We're going to read a story about a flood and a promise that God makes. And then we're going to skip over a couple of stories, but our video will give you some ideas what those stories are about.
Who do you trust? Who do you listen to? How are you gonna live your life? This is a choice we've gotta wrestle through. Every girl and boy and man and wife. God gave Adam and Eve a choice. Trust him or trust the voices they heard around him. They chose poorly. By turning away from God, they said they didn't believe him. They were going to go their own way. And sin entered the world.
What's sin?
Sin is when we ignore God, when we go our own way, when we put ourselves first in front of our friends and neighbors and in front of God. When we say to God, I don't care what you say, I'm going to do it my way. Sin entering the world changed everything.
Why?
Because of who God is. God is so pure, sin cannot be near him. Now that serpent knew that. He was trying to hurt God, and he knew if he could get Adam and Eve to sin, then they couldn't be close to God. God's most beloved creatures would have to live their lives apart from him.
Couldn't God just change the rules so they could be with him again? He can do anything, right?
Yes, God can do anything. Anything except change his own nature. He can't change who he is. If God changed who he was, he wouldn't be God anymore. So even though it made God very, very sad, Adam and Eve had to leave the garden and live new lives in a wild, mean world. Now they're a long, long way from paradise. Yes, they're a long, long way from home. And now the world they're in ain't very nice because they're living on their own. So once again we ask the question, who do you trust? Who do you listen to? How are you gonna live your life? This is a choice we've got to wrestle through. Every girl and boy and man and wife.
This isn't a very happy story.
Nope, and unfortunately the rest of primeval history only gets worse. Sin has a way of spreading, so much so that one of Adam and Eve's sons turned on his brother and killed him.
Oh no.
Then there were more and more people and more sin until God's creation was drowning in sin. God decided the only way to keep his creation from drowning in sin was to drown the sin. So he flooded the whole world.
Oh, I know this story.
Yep, all that sin was washed away. Unfortunately, so was most of his creation. But he chose one family, led by one man, to start over.
Noah.
That's right. Noah had tried to avoid sin all his life so he could be closer to God. He wasn't perfect, but he was a good man who listened for God's voice. That's why God chose him to start things over. Him and a bunch of animals, of course.
Who came in by twosies.
Except for the ones they used for food. They came in by sevensies. You see, Noah trusted God and listened to God, and God used his family to start over again, to give his creation a second chance.
Is that the end of primeval history?
Unfortunately, no. After the flood, Noah's family was still living in a broken world full of temptation to do your own thing. They were a long, long way from paradise. They were a long, long way from home. And some of Noah's kids were not so nice as they were living on their own. They wondered, who should we trust? Who should we listen to? How are we gonna live our lives? This is a choice we've gotta wrestle through. All the girls and boys and men and wives. So Noah's kids had kids, and they had kids, and so on and so on, and they got successful and started building towns and cities and getting proud of themselves. This, of course, is sin. They thought they were so great they decided to build a tower to touch the sky so they could be as tall as God.
That's a crazy idea.
Yep, leave folks alone long enough and they'll come up with all sorts of crazy ideas, like ostrich racing.
Did God have to flood the world again?
No, he promised after the first flood that he would never do that again. That's what the rainbow was about.
Oh yeah, I remember.
But he had to do something because their sinful pride was out of control, so he mixed up their language.
What?
He made it so they couldn't understand each other. He scrambled their talking. If they couldn't understand each other, they couldn't work together to build that big, prideful tower. So they all gave up and wandered off on their own. And God knew it was time for his real rescue plan. A plan that could take the sin away from his children once and for all and set the world right so we could all live with him once more.
Ooh, tell me that story.
I can't. We've come to the end of primeval history, the first 11 chapters of Genesis that set up the rest of the Bible and all alive. But I hope you've learned from these stories a great truth that we'll see over and over again. Things go well when we listen to God, and very badly when we don't. And that leaves us with one little question. Who do you trust? Who do you listen to? How are you gonna live your life? This is choice we've got to wrestle through. Every girl and boy and man and wife. Every girl and boy and man and wife. Yee-haw!
All of these stories in Genesis are about listening to God, trusting God, knowing that God loves you, that God loves all of us. So let's read our story. We're reading from the Laugh and Grow Bible, the Bible for kids. And I don't know if you were visiting me on the first week when we started, but I still have my trusty bookmark that we made. And it is going to carry me all the way through the Bible. So we're going to read a Bible story from Genesis, still at the very beginning. See, we're still at the very beginning of the Bible, in the very first book. And this book, this story in the book is called Noah and the Flood. Adam and Eve had kids, and their kids had kids, and their kids had kids, grandkids and great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids spreading all over the whole wide world. And people were not getting along. People were not listening to God, and they were not doing the right thing. They were fighting, they were stealing, they were lying and hurting each other, making God's world an ugly place. And finally, God said, enough! It was time to start again. God decided to pick one good person to start the world over again. But who? All of these people were fighting and hurting. Was anyone good? Was anyone kind enough to trust with such an important job? Yes, God chose Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He tried very hard to make right choices. He tried not to fight, to not steal or lie. Noah walked with God, and that means that in a world where everyone was doing their own thing, Noah was thinking about God, talking to God, listening to God. Noah was always ready to do what God asked. Oh yeah, and there was one other thing we know about Noah. He was more than 500 years old. Yep, 500 years old. People lived a long time back then. Not only was Noah a righteous man who walked with God, but Noah had been practicing walking with God and listening to God and listening for God's voice for more than 500 years. That's a long time. So when God had a really, really big job to do, God knew who to call because he had been listening for a long time, more than 500 years. God said, "Hey Noah, build a boat." And Noah said, "What's a boat?" And God said, "It's a thing that can float if there's a flood." Noah said, "What's a flood?" And God said, "It's when the water covers everything. It's why you need a boat." And Noah said, "How big?" God said, "Big enough for your family." Noah said, "Anything else?" God said, "Oh, and some animals." Noah said, "How many animals?" And God said, "All of them." At this point, Noah probably fainted, and God probably had to poke him with a stick to wake him up. And then God gave him plans for building a boat, a very, very big boat. Noah and his family set to work building a boat so big that it could hold all of them, plus 2 of every kind of animal. Building a boat that big took years and years. Noah's neighbors probably came by often, laughing at him for building such a boat when there was no water. But Noah didn't care about the laughing. He had been walking with God for a long time, and he knew he was going to keep on walking with God no matter what. Noah wanted to be God's friend, even if everyone else thought this was silly. Then one day it started to rain. The animals came from everywhere. Big animals, little animals, tall animals, short animals. God sent the animals to Noah, and Noah packed them all up in his big, big boat. And it kept raining harder and harder, and suddenly having a boat looked like a pretty good idea. God covered the land with water so that all the mean and fighting and hurting could finally stop. All of it just died in the flood. But so did most of God's creation. It was a sad time. It rained and poured for 40 days. Noah's big, big boat floated on the water. 50 days, 60 days, 100 days. After 150 days, a big, big boat was getting very, very stinky. Have you ever been on a pig farm or an elephant house at the zoo? Stinky ones like that, but it was worse. Then finally the water started to go down, 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 down. One day, at long last, Noah's big, big boat came to rest at the top of a mountain. "Let's start again," God said. So Noah and his family, plus a whole bunch of seasick animals, walked out of the big boat onto a clean and fresh world. It was time to start again. Well, when I read this story, there's a lot of things that surprises me. Like Noah being 500 years old. And how would you really build a boat so big that the animals could all fit on it? I don't know. I don't know because I wasn't there, and I am just reading this story. And I need to realize that the most important part about this story is that God loves us. God loves us so much that God gave us a promise. And I didn't read it in this story. Maybe if I keep going. No, it didn't keep going. In the story, it continues with Noah sending out a bird to see if there's enough dry land to open up the boat so all the animals could get out. And then at the end of the story, God put the most beautiful thing in the sky. It's a rainbow. Have you seen a rainbow? That was God's promise to Noah and to all of us, that God is not going to flood the entire world again. God promises to live with us, to love us, and to take care of us. And what we need to do for this promise is to love God and to love everyone. Sometimes that's hard, but when it's hard, we can talk to God, and God can help us through the hard times and remind us of that very special, beautiful promise. And that's what I did for my art activity today. I drew God's promise. I drew a rainbow and I drew the bird because Noah sent the bird, but also this bird is a symbol. It's a symbol of peace. It's a symbol reminding us to love each other. Even when people make us mad or do things that make us annoyed or make us want to roll our eyes or do things that we don't understand. We need to remember the promise and the peace that God has for us, and that we can share that promise and peace with others. Well, my friends, I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.